All right, we also have Dr. Shane Phillips is going to talk to us a little bit about some data. As you know, the state was supposed to release some report card data for our schools on November 15th. I just wanted to let the school district know, or the school board know, that that has been delayed. There has been all kinds of problems with their data systems, the data not matching, the data not being right. And the reason it really fell apart at the last minute was these folks like Shane and his compatriots across the state realized that none of the numbers were making sense, and that we didn't have access to those numbers until just a couple of days ago, I believe, and that triggered a number of things. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about what we do have available, and just would like to turn it over to Dr. Phillips.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Little, thank you. The parade of numbers and acronyms continues. So we're going to talk tonight about the test that we couldn't talk about before because of embargoes by the state. So we're going to talk about end-of-course exams. We're going to talk about SAT, ACT, AP, and IB tests tonight. So very quickly, I'll just kind of go through our how we sort of distributed our grades for these tests, and then I'll kind of give you an idea of some trends and some changes that have taken place in this test in particular. So for Algebra 1, we had 81% pass rate this year for Algebra 1 with the grades distributed as you can see, with more than half of our kids scoring A, B, or C. In Biology 1, it was 76%. Again, with more than half of our kids scoring A, B, or C. English 1, we're at 87%. And U.S. History, we're at 82%. Now, if we look at that over time, you're going to see that there have been some dips. And let me explain some of the reasons why that happened. So we were told by the state to expect dips in algebra and in English starting in 2016-17 because of a realignment of the scale. They reset the standard on the scale for a variety of reasons, including the new 10-point grading scale, those kinds of issues, and plus the scale is aging and it needed to be realigned. So in 2016-17, that happened. Also in 2016-17, there was a new field test in the spring of that year for writing in the English 1 end-of-course test. That was a new thing altogether for English 1. So they implemented a field test for that in the spring. Now that didn't count for the actual score. It was just there to test the items. And then also they implemented new standards in biology in 2016-17. Remembering that this is South Carolina and we like to change our tests a good bit, that all happened in 2016-17. In 2017-18, that writing portion was actually implemented in the English 1 test. So that was the first year. This past year was the first year that we actually conducted operational items in English 1 on writing. And then in the next couple years, we're going to be phasing in Algebra 2 and English 2 end-of-course tests that will eventually replace the Algebra 1 and English 1 end-of-course tests. So lots of changes have happened in end-of-course, and lots of changes are upcoming in end-of-course. So looking at that, here's what happened in Algebra 1. We saw the dip that we were expecting from 15-16 to 16-17 when they implemented the rescaling. We saw it again in English here. Now they did indicate from the state that this would not be as drastic as the algebra, and it wasn't. It panned out just like the state said it would. Here we see the change in standards that are being tested in Biology 1, okay? And you see that they're relatively stable there's a little bit of a dip, but relatively stable after the change. And in fact, in English 1, the scores actually came up this year in the first year of implementation of the writing. And I think, we've put across all grades an emphasis on writing, and so hopefully that's paying off there in the high school level as well. And then U.S. history, you can see no changes in U.S. history, and our scores have remained relatively stable over time. So when we look at the state comparison by state, you can see that we still well outperform the state in all areas. So now we'll talk about SAT. So the report that you're going to see here for SAT is on our graduating seniors. All right, and so again, this is a trend, but you'll notice there's only 2 years here. The reason there are only 2 years is because in 16-17, SAT redesigned their test. And so comparing it to years before that is irrelevant. And so if we look here, we can see that in each area, reading and math, we grew about 10 points, 11 points in math, 10 in reading, for a composite gain of about 20 points year over year. If we look at that compared to the state and nation, we outperform both. And it's interesting this year because the state outperformed the nation as well. So we outperform the state and we outperform the nation in each area and in the composite.
That's good.
For the ACT, this is not graduating seniors. This is everybody, and there's a reason for that, and I'll explain it. Here's a trend over time with ACT, okay, with the district being in blue and the state being in green. So you can see that across time, we outperform the state consistently. But you see this drop from 14-15 to 15-16. And the reason why is because starting in 15-16, every student in their third year in high school was required to take the ACT for the school years of 15-16 and 16-17. That changed again in 17-18 when they decided that you should have the option to take either the SAT, the ACT, or neither one. And so, you would have expected because here, that testing sample is self-selected. If you wanted to take the ACT, you felt like that was the test for you, that's what you took. And there was no requirement. But when we required everybody, obviously those scores are going to drop some because kids who typically would not have taken the ACT took the ACT. Now, so that kind of explains this drop. What's good news here is that you can look across these years and notice that even when it became optional, these scores remained very stable. Okay, so the kids who are taking it are still making the same score. So we feel comfortable about the stability of these scores across time. If we look at the scores across time by subject, again, you'll notice very stable across the board. We're staying in that 18, 19, 20 point range on each subject. Our best subjects by far are reading and science, with English and math following up closely behind. AP and IB, we've been putting a big focus on getting kids into more rigorous coursework over the past few years. And so if you take a look here, this is our AP test pass rate compared to the state. And you can see it's quite a bit better than the state average. If we look at students tested, I think we're really proud of this in instruction because we've been putting a lot of emphasis on that, and you can see steady increases and a pretty dramatic increase from 16-17 to 17-18 in the number of kids that we tested.
I'm going to jump in this, and I'm going to steal some of your thunder. I know you're going to talk about this. So keep in mind, remember what we talked about earlier with USC's Palmetto College. So what you see here is a high school trend of over 100 kid increase taking AP tests, and at the same time, another 100 or so kids from last year to this year taking dual credit classes. So when people talked about, when we brought dual enrollment really at a much higher level here, there was always some concern that, well, is it going to impact the number of students who are taking AP? And I think what you see here is quite the opposite. It really illustrates there's enough rigorous coursework to go around. So now this year, over 430 students taking dual enrollment classes, and look at the number of students tested in AP as well. So huge enrollment increases from one year to the next, and I guess our scores. I may be stepping on your next slide, but and our scores were stable. So if you notice in this slide, our scores are stable, even though we're testing a lot more kids. So that is a great sign for us as well, that these students that were not in more rigorous coursework ahead of time are now in this coursework, and they're still succeeding. And we have this other group of kids, and I see Mr. Poole out here, and we have this other group of kids who are taking dual enrollment as well. That's a lot of college credit, a lot of rigorous coursework being taken in our high schools, and that's pretty cool.
And it speaks toward our efforts to meet that profile of the South Carolina graduate and those multiple measures that you can use for the state report card to get to that college and career readiness measure. We're making great progress in that area, I think. If we talk about IB, you'll see some of the same trends. So this year, we awarded twice as many IB diplomas as last year, and we had more than twice as many attempted. So a lot more, and you know, those numbers for folks that don't know about IB look kind of small, but that's a really, really, really hard thing to do.
That will increase now that we've added the elementary and middle schools.
Yes, and we have our IB department is really making an emphasis on recruitment, and we want to continue, that program is going to continue to grow, is my anticipation.
Right. And so you'll see, again, the number of tests that were taken doubled, and the pass rate for those tests actually increased on IB.
Great.
So before I take your questions, I did want to just mention again, reiterate something that Dr. Little said about the school report cards. There were quite a number of problems with those report cards. The state initially was going to release those, as we mentioned before, on Thursday. The problems were quite dramatic and extensive, and so the nerds like me around the state raised quite a stink about it, and so some of those things are being addressed. I don't think the reason that's going to be stated for the delay is all of the things that they're going to be looking at, I hope, because there are other things that they need to address aside from the one school quality measure. So we're continuing to gripe. All right, I'll take any questions you guys might have.
So thank you, Dr. Phillips.
Yes, sir.
So the averages are very helpful. Something we may want to consider for future iterations are like a distribution, you know, like a 95% distribution, because I think also as a board, we want to understand how those lowest performers are moving. And obviously the goal is to tighten that distribution and then move it up the continuum. So I think we've gotten some good insight on the high flyers, but we also want to focus on the low flyers.
Yes, sir.
And how are we doing as we work those averages. So, but thank you.
Yes, sir. Others?
Yep. Anyone else? Thank you so much.
Thank you.